Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos titres, grades et rangs respectifs et respectés, je voudrais très sincèrement vous remercier, mais surtout vous féliciter pour cette pertinente initiative en ce qui concerne cette conférence mondiale de l'UNESCO sur l'enseignement supérieur. Je suis très heureuse, bien sûr, de prendre part à cette conférence et je vous remercie de m'avoir conviée. Je voudrais aussi vous dire tout simplement la pertinence de cette problématique de nos jours. Et je voudrais très sincèrement reconnaître le travail extraordinaire que Monsieur le directeur Petro et toute son équipe sont.
Haga clic en Añadir a Chrome para continuar. Haga clic en Añadir a Chrome para continuar.
رجع استعمل أيام فوكات بيلا يدخل في ريما غاية خلاص غير وهبي لما أنطل رجع على كوندر الفرن لما أترانتين هذا نقول ندري إيش الترانتين نقول فيش ترانتين يعني هذا تو الاستاسيون يجتمع على كرة وراجل اللي جماعة تنظر فيهم يسرعون الفرن ياك ما يتقاس اشتري يقول بحضرتك مثل بوسيبيتي يتقاس لا يتقاس محمد الدنا مدير كبر مدير الكوميسار قال انتم مثل الناس الخرجاء وعندي عندي ودايت شو انا نقول ان السؤال عندي انا لا طرح عن الناس ما هو ينفعكم السؤال خير خير لا نطلع ورك من الفورم ونجاوب ان شاء الله. السلام عليكم يا جماعة الخير، صباح الخير، صباح الناس، صباح الخير. السؤال اللي طرحه المدير هو محمد الدنا خير. هذا سمعته الشاهدي حضرا وانا باسم الاكوارا ما يقول ما هو مسألة واحدة. اللي يديني في سلسلة يعني أنا طالبين من أعضاء كاملين فوق الزفاف ولو بيقدموا شيء ما نقدر نترانتين عارفين نترانتين أكبر فاسرينين أنا ما أقدر نتكلم بس فاسرينين وفر السياسيون ونقدر نساعد من القرار طالبات كاملين بدون طالبات خلينا ندرسهم إن شاء الله ونعطيه هذا ما تعطيه دفعهم محمد ما رأيك بالسؤال ما تعرف انت تعرف تسوي الناس كامل زي كذا.
All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning, and greetings to colleagues who are joining us online. We are going to do something unprecedented on the final day of the World Higher Education Conference, and we're going to start on time. So, as I said, greetings. We're really thrilled that you're joining us here today for this session on higher education as a human right. I'm Emma Sabzalieva at UNESCO's International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm thrilled to be moderating this session today. Let me just tell you a little bit about the background, why we're so invested in this issue. I think we all know that education is a fundamental human right for everyone. And commitment to the right to education extends to all levels of education, because the right to education is the right to lifelong learning. And as an integral part of the educational continuum, quality higher education should be available to all. So to uphold this human right, higher education should be provided in different ways that embrace the very varied cultural, social, economic, and linguistic backgrounds and interests of students around the world. So today, to expand discussions around the right to higher education and move the international agenda forward, in this session, I'm delighted that we'll be able to include a speech by the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to education, Dr. Kumbu Bolubari, followed by a panel discussion raising youth voices and providing fresh perspectives on this important topic. So we're shortly going to be launching a video that's been recorded by the Special Rapporteur. So Ms. Kumbu Bolubari from Burkina Faso took office as UN Special Rapporteur on the right to education in August 2016. She holds a PhD in economic history from Cheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal. She's the former Ministry of Education and Literacy of Burkina Faso and has consulted widely for various governments and international institutions on the right to education. She's been an advocate on gender issues in education. She also has ample knowledge and experience in training and research as a visiting professor at the University of Nottingham in the UK, University of Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium, and as a lecturer at Ouagadougou University in Burkina Faso, Vitória University in Brazil, and Freiburg University in Switzerland. So if I could ask for the video now to be played, and we'll listen to her short lecture, and then I'll invite the panelists after that to join me on the stage.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos titres, grades et rangs respectifs et respectés, je voudrais très sincèrement vous remercier, mais surtout vous féliciter pour cette pertinente initiative en ce qui concerne cette conférence mondiale de l'UNESCO sur l'enseignement supérieur. Je suis très heureuse, bien sûr, de prendre part à cette conférence et je vous remercie de m'avoir convié. Je voudrais aussi vous dire tout simplement la pertinence de cette problématique de nos jours. Et je voudrais très sincèrement reconnaître le travail extraordinaire que Monsieur le directeur Pedro et toute son équipe sont en train d'organiser sur ces enjeux éducatifs de l'enseignement supérieur. Je voudrais aussi dire que ce n'est pas fortuit que cette conférence se déroule à Barcelone. Barcelone, bien sûr, qui est une terre d'expertise, Barcelone où les chercheurs et les universitaires se sont organisés depuis plusieurs décennies pour s'assurer bien sûr de l'effectivité du droit à l'éducation et particulièrement à l'enseignement supérieur des groupes les plus marginalisés à travers des innovations dans le domaine de la recherche-action. Et je voudrais vraiment reconnaître ce travail extraordinaire qui est fait par la ville de Barcelone, mais particulièrement par ses chercheurs universitaires, et femmes et hommes, et bien sûr, toutes disciplines confondues. Je voudrais aussi reconnaître le travail au niveau mondial de l'ensemble des chercheurs du monde entier. Et c'est vraiment l'occasion de les féliciter et de les encourager à poursuivre cette perspective parce que de toute façon, sans les résultats des chercheurs, sans les réflexions des chercheurs, notre humanité ne pourra jamais innover et elle ne pourra jamais aller de l'avant. Et pour moi, ça c'est fondamentalement important. Et je voudrais encore profiter aussi de cette opportunité pour féliciter l'équipe qui est en charge du droit à l'éducation au siège de l'UNESCO à Paris. J'ai nommé Mme Rola Moumné avec toute son équipe pour les encourager, malgré les modiques moyens, pour les encourager par rapport à la pertinence de leurs engagements, les encourager par rapport surtout à l'enjeu fondamentalement important de ce que ça représente, le droit à l'éducation au niveau mondial. Et je voudrais vraiment saisir cette occasion pour remercier l'équipe technique qui m'accompagne au niveau du mandat de l'éducation, qui a participé à l'organisation et bien sûr à la mise en place de cette belle initiative de façon conjointe que nous sommes en train de réaliser et d'organiser aujourd'hui. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, de quoi parlons-nous en fait? Il faut reconnaître que assez souvent, nous pensons plus à l'éducation primaire, à la limite secondaire, et nous oublions assez souvent les autres pans des systèmes éducatifs. Nous oublions assez souvent le préscolaire et nous oublions assez souvent l'enseignement supérieur. Mais il faut aussi reconnaître que très souvent, ce qui arrive, c'est que les gens ont tendance à faire des confusions. Quand on parle par exemple de l'enseignement technique et professionnel, on oublie que cet enseignement-là doit être intégré dans le processus éducatif depuis le préscolaire jusqu'au niveau de l'enseignement supérieur. Malheureusement, assez souvent, on a tendance à oublier que cette dimension-là fait partie aussi, bien sûr, du concept de l'enseignement supérieur. Et c'est d'ailleurs pour ça que les futurs de l'éducation, qui ont été tout à fait bien déterminés par l'UNESCO, ont absolument prévu et insisté sur le fait qu'il faut s'assurer que justement ces compétences-là, à la fois techniques et professionnelles, soient intégrées dans l'enseignement supérieur. Que ce soit les établissements, mais ce soit aussi les instituts de formation. Un troisième élément peut-être important sur lequel il faut absolument que nous puissions faire attention, c'est le fait aussi que très souvent, on oublie que l'éducation, c'est vraiment l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie. Donc, on ne s'arrête pas au préscolaire ou au primaire ou au secondaire, mais l'éducation devrait permettre à chaque individu et dans chaque société, mais chacun par rapport à ses moyens, par rapport à son contexte, par rapport aussi à ses desiderata, c'est-à-dire à ses demandes et ses besoins spécifiques, s'assurer que bien sûr chaque apprenant puisse développer ses capacités qui lui permettent de participer à la vie à la fois civique, politique, économique, sociale, culturelle, mais aussi au développement durable de nos sociétés et de notre humanité. Et ça, je crois que c'est ça la ligne, et la ligne la plus essentielle pour notre humanité. Nous parlons également d'un droit protégé par les instruments internationaux, celui du droit à l'enseignement supérieur. Selon l'article 13 du pacte international du droit relatif par exemple aux droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, toute personne a le droit à l'éducation. Cela ne se limite pas aux échelons de l'enseignement primaire ou secondaire. Mais je dis et je répète, c'est l'éducation tout au long de la vie. L'article 13 précise aussi qu'en vue d'assurer le plein exercice du droit à l'éducation, l'enseignement supérieur doit être rendu accessible à tous et à toutes et en pleine équité et égalité en fonction des capacités de chacun et de chacune. Ce droit doit être abordé en utilisant bien sûr le cadre des 4 capacités, les 4A. Premièrement, la dotation en termes bien sûr de disponibilité. Les institutions éducatives et les programmes éducatifs doivent être accessibles à tous et à toutes, sans discrimination, à l'intérieur de la juridiction de l'État. L'accessibilité inclut l'accessibilité physique, économique, mais aussi géographique et à l'information. Les discriminations fondées sur le sexe, le genre, l'origine nationale ou ethnique, la condition sociale ou encore le handicap sont des questions majeures auxquelles il faut s'attaquer. Cela inclut des difficultés qu'ont les jeunes, les femmes par exemple, de voyager pour aller étudier à l'étranger ou d'accéder à certaines filières. La forme et le contenu de l'enseignement, y compris les programmes éducatifs et les méthodes pédagogiques, doivent être acceptables, par exemple pertinents, culturellement et appropriés de bonne qualité pour les étudiants et les étudiantes, et selon le besoin des parents et la forme aussi et le fond de l'éducation, incluant les programmes et les méthodes d'enseignement, doivent être orientés vers les buts et les objectifs, pour ne pas dire les finalités, afin de garantir le droit international et les droits humains. L'adaptabilité, comme 4e A, l'enseignement doit être souple, de manière à pouvoir être adapté aux besoins et à la demande des sociétés et des communautés en mutation, tout comme aux besoins des étudiants et des étudiantes, bien sûr, dans leur propre cadre social et culturel. Ce format nous invite à nous pencher sur quelques questions très importantes. La question des capacités de chacun et de chacune. Le droit à un enseignement supérieur doit s'attendre à un droit à l'enseignement supérieur gratuit, mais aussi l'importance du secteur public de l'éducation au niveau supérieur. Et enfin, l'importance cruciale de la liberté académique et de la recherche scientifique. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, l'accès au savoir comme bien commun, le droit de participer à la vie scientifique et la nécessité, bien sûr, de sciences ouvertes, open science. Je note que la recommandation de l'UNESCO concernant la science et les chercheurs scientifiques de 2017 reconnaît l'importance de la science en tant que bien commun. La commission aussi de l'UNESCO sur les futurs de l'éducation, pour sa part, a relevé que le savoir est une extraordinaire réalisation humaine qui appartient à tous et à toutes. Il importe de bien garder cette approche à l'esprit. Nos patrimoines de connaissances communes sont notre bien commun. Dans le domaine de la recherche, ceci a des implications concrètes, demandant notamment la publication des articles de recherche scientifique en accès ouvert. Il me semble nécessaire de revisiter les modèles économiques, notamment le système de publication scientifique par des grands journaux hors de prix et donc hors d'accès pour de nombreuses universités et instituts de recherche, et notamment dans les pays du Sud. La protection des droits des étudiants et des étudiantes dans le cadre de l'enseignement supérieur constitue aussi un élément majeur. Je voudrais terminer ma présentation en insistant sur la question des droits des apprenants et des apprenantes dans le cadre de l'enseignement supérieur, en prenant appui sur les événements d'actualité qui nous concernent tous et toutes. La première est le droit au respect de la vie privée. Dans le cadre de la digitalisation de l'éducation, qui s'est considérablement accentuée avec la pandémie du Covid-19, le droit au respect à la vie privée des apprenants et des apprenantes n'a souvent pas été respecté. Aucune considération ne peut justifier de telles violations. Il n'y a pas réellement de possibilité pour les apprenants et les apprenantes de refuser leur consentement à la collecte de leurs données. Ils ne peuvent pas véritablement contester les dispositions relatives à la protection de la vie privée adoptées dans les établissements d'enseignement et refuser de fournir des données en dépit des préoccupations légitimes, soit parce que ces données sont récoltées secrètement, soit parce qu'aucune possibilité n'est offerte de refuser d'être suivi. Une autre de mes préoccupations concerne le lien strict qui s'établit de plus en plus entre le secteur de l'éducation et le marché du travail par le biais des données numériques. La numérisation du parcours d'études des étudiants et des étudiantes peut désormais servir de curriculum vitae professionnel précis pour entrer dans le marché du travail. Cela s'opère dans l'opacité, sans droit de rectification, souvent, avec une surveillance constante des étudiants et des étudiantes dont les erreurs peuvent avoir des conséquences importantes pour leur avenir. Dans le cas, par exemple, d'une présence irrégulière aux exercices en ligne. En outre, cela peut conduire à une emprise du secteur de l'emploi sur le secteur, bien sûr, de l'éducation, en ne valorisant que des parcours éducatifs pertinents pour les employeurs et en dictant au final que certains cours ne sont plus simplement dispensés. Et ça constitue un élément majeur de notre réflexion. Je voudrais aussi rappeler que les étudiants et les étudiantes, et les apprenants et les apprenantes qui partent faire leurs études dans d'autres contrées, donc à l'étranger, sont parfois particulièrement vulnérables. Lors de la crise du Covid-19, des témoignages ont fait état d'étudiants laissés à eux-mêmes, sans ressources, dans divers pays hôtes. La crise aussi des réfugiés venant de l'Ukraine, parmi lesquels se trouvaient des étudiants et des étudiantes étrangers et étrangères, a aussi montré ces vulnérabilités et le traitement intolérable qui leur a été réservé. Des protections spéciales devraient être vraiment établies pour que ces événements ne se répètent plus jamais dans notre humanité. Enfin, je voudrais insister sur certains enjeux. Une de mes préoccupations majeures, mais surtout aussi celle de mes prédécesseurs dans le mandat, mais je voudrais encore insister que cette préoccupation aujourd'hui, elle concerne pratiquement tous les rapporteurs spéciaux des Nations Unies qui ont aussi abordé d'autres thématiques. Et cela concerne particulièrement la commercialisation croissante du secteur de l'éducation, mais aussi d'autres secteurs sociaux, comme la santé, comme l'environnement, comme l'eau. Je voudrais insister sur deux dimensions. Pour moi, la gratuité de l'éducation va de pair avec l'instauration d'un système éducatif public pertinent, de qualité et accessible à tous et à toutes, et très fort. Il faut garder donc cette question à l'esprit pour deux éléments et deux raisons essentielles. Le premier est la participation des entreprises commerciales dans l'élaboration des manuels, dans l'organisation de conférences, dans la création des chaires universitaires ou des programmes de recherche. Et ça, d'une certaine façon, ces problèmes posent, en ce qui me concerne, des libertés académiques. Et l'élaboration, bien sûr, de contenus éducatifs de qualité sont biaisés à ce niveau-là pour des raisons type commercial. Le deuxième élément important pour moi, c'est la digitalisation de l'éducation. Et cette digitalisation de l'éducation est une voie d'entrée importante et phénoménale des acteurs privés commerciaux dans les secteurs de l'éducation et à tous les niveaux des secteurs de l'éducation, du préscolaire jusqu'au niveau de l'enseignement supérieur et surtout aujourd'hui de plus en plus au niveau de l'enseignement supérieur. Je pense que c'est très important de s'assurer que la digitalisation et la problématique de la commercialisation de l'éducation constitue un enjeu majeur pour les décideurs, mais aussi pour les chercheurs universitaires, mais aussi ceux qui gouvernent nos universités et qui gouvernent l'enseignement supérieur. C'est très important et il faut absolument pouvoir s'attaquer à cette question-là à l'échelle mondiale. Un point important et particulièrement un enjeu qui me tient aussi à cœur, sur lequel je voudrais vraiment terminer cette conférence et cette contribution, c'est de dire l'importance cruciale de la liberté académique et de la recherche scientifique. On ne peut, il me semble, parler d'éducation supérieure sans aborder la question cruciale et fondamentale de la liberté académique et de la recherche scientifique. Je suis très préoccupée par cette question parce que de nombreuses informations me parviennent. J'ai reçu de nombreuses interpellations venant bien sûr du monde académique, mais venant aussi de la société civile et venant bien sûr des gens du privé. Et cela commence déjà à devenir de plus en plus inquiétant. Et vraiment, c'est un phénomène qui va grandissant. Et je pense que si on ne prend pas des mesures assez vite et assez tôt, c'est très important que cette question-là puisse être examinée de près par à la fois les chercheurs, les décideurs, mais aussi bien sûr les universitaires eux-mêmes et la société civile qui a un rôle d'avant-gardiste et qui est toujours disponible pour pouvoir accompagner. Je sais que l'UNESCO a permis d'adopter la recommandation révisée concernant les sciences et les chercheurs en 2017. Et ça, je crois que je salue cette décision et je salue cette adoption parce qu'elle est essentielle et elle va permettre bien sûr de construire une belle perspective. Je voudrais aussi rappeler que selon le comité des droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, dans son observation générale numéro 13, les membres de la communauté universitaire sont libres, individuellement, collectivement, d'acquérir et de développer et de transmettre savoir et idées à travers la recherche, l'enseignement, l'étude, les discussions, la documentation, la production et la création, mais aussi les publications. Les libertés académiques englobent la liberté pour l'individu d'exprimer librement ses opinions sur l'institution, sur le système dans lequel il travaille, d'exercer ses fonctions sans être soumis à des mesures discriminatoires et sans crainte de répression de la part de l'État et de tout autre acteur, de participer bien sûr aux travaux d'organismes universitaires, professionnels ou représentatifs et de jouir de tous les droits des réformes reconnues sur le plan international applicables aux autres individus relevant de la même juridiction. La jouissance des libertés académiques a pour contrepartie des obligations, par exemple celle de respecter les libertés académiques d'autrui, de garantir un débat contradictoire, équitable et de réserver le même traitement à tous et à toutes sans discrimination fondée sur l'un ou l'autre des motifs prescrits. Par ailleurs, l'exercice des libertés académiques nécessite l'autonomie des établissements d'enseignement supérieur. Être autonome, c'est pour un établissement d'enseignement supérieur, c'est jouir du degré d'indépendance dont il a besoin pour prendre des décisions efficaces, qu'il s'agisse de ses travaux, de ses normes, de sa gestion, mais aussi de ses activités connexes. Il reste que cette autonomie doit être compatible avec les systèmes de contrôle public, en ce qui concerne en particulier les fonds octroyés par l'État. Vu les importants investissements publics réalisés dans l'enseignement supérieur, il importe d'établir un équilibre satisfaisant entre l'autonomie de l'établissement et l'obligation qu'il a de rendre des comptes. Dans ce domaine, il n'existe pas d'arrangement type unique. Les arrangements institutionnels doivent néanmoins être raisonnables, justes, équitables et aussi transparents et ouverts à la participation que possible. C'est la recommandation fondamentale que je fais à ce niveau-là. Ceci dit, je voudrais encore vous féliciter pour cette belle initiative et vous encourager à poursuivre à la fois la réflexion, mais surtout vous rassurer que je suis disponible pour pouvoir continuer à aiguillonner le droit et sincèrement le droit à une éducation supérieure de qualité publique pour tous et pour toutes, parce que c'est un droit fondamentalement humain et pour moi, il y va de notre humanité tout entière. Merci beaucoup.
we're really delighted that the Special Rapporteur was able to record this video for us. I'm very pleased to let you know that's going to be available, I think in the coming minutes actually, on the YouTube channel of UNESCO IESALC, which means it's now obviously publicly available. So I would encourage you, please, watch it again at your leisure, share it widely. I think, there's been some incredibly important messages that have been shared there. And I'm just thrilled that we've been able to play it for the first time. And in fact, we only actually received the video at 4 a.m. today, so it's the very first time we've all watched it. So it's quite a moving moment for all of us, and it's wonderful. Of course, it would have been great to have the Special Rapporteur with us in the room, but in a way, given what she's talked about in terms of openness and open access to knowledge, in a way, it's actually better that we've got it and we can make it available in this virtual format. So what we're going to do now, she invited us at the end of the speech to reflect on some of the points that she's made, all of the points that she made. So let's do that right now. And joining me now on the stage are three fantastic panelists. So if you'd like to come up as I introduce you. So we have Kanisha Aurora, we have Eva Papanikolaki, we have Erendira Rodriguez de Leon. Welcome. So I'm just going to read you out their bios. So Kanisha is a passionate medical science student in Canada. She's influenced education at all levels and works towards restoring humanity through her Princess Diana Award-winning nonprofit, the Hope Sisters. Kanisha's recently been elected as UNESCO's youth representative for North America and Europe through the SDG 4 Youth Network, and sits on the high-level steering committee chaired by the Honourable Audrey Azoulay. Previously, Kanisha served as the youngest school board trustee in the Toronto area, where she represented over 150,000 students and worked with the Minister of Education to dismantle systemic inequities. Now, at her university, Kanisha works alongside the deans as a senator and chair of the Student Senate, and also manages a $30 million budget to transform the university experience for all students. So Kanisha, welcome to the stage. Eva Papanikolaki is an activist, the co-coordinator of Fridays for Future Greece, and an advocate for climate education. She's studying economics for her second year at the Athens University of Economics and Business. Academically, she's engaged with environmental economics and as an assistant researcher. There, she coordinates the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the SDSN Hub. And this year, she's also one of the organizers of the local conference of youth and the youth delegation program in Greece. Moreover, she's the founder of a green startup company that promotes sustainability in municipalities. Welcome, Eva. And Erendira Rodriguez de Leon is founder of the social initiative ADUX, Leaders for Education. Erendira is a Mexican student on the Bachelor in Engineering Physics at Tec de Monterrey. I hope that's not my mic that's scratching. I apologize if it is. In 2015 and 2016, she participated in the Mexican physics contest for secondary students, achieving gold medal. After struggling with a difficult family financial situation, in 2019, she was awarded with the Leaders of Tomorrow Scholarship at Tec de Monterrey. This is a program that covers 100% of the tuition fee for students with a strong leadership profile and social compromise with their communities. During her professional studies, she's participated in different social activities as an instructor over the last 2 years in the Beautiful Patterns program from MIT and Tec de Monterrey. She's also counselor of the Youth Council of Citizen Participation of Nuevo León, her hometown in Mexico. And in 2021, Erendira created ADUX. You're going to have to correct me because I'm sure that's not how you say it. Leaders for Education, a social initiative that seeks to reduce the educational gap produced due to the pandemic in high schools. And today, more than 1,200 students have benefited from the program and is currently representing Mexico in the RISE U21 international competition. So you can see colleagues who are joining us in the room. This is a very distinguished panel. So join me in a very warmly welcoming the panelists, and I'm now going to come and sit down next to them and hear what they had to say about the video. So thank you very much for joining us. So I know we're sitting on a stage and it feels a little bit uncomfortable, but let's try as far as we can to make this a bit more of a conversation. So we've just heard some very profound, I think, and important points in the Special Rapporteur's speech. Let me encourage you to share with our audience some of your initial reactions to that. So perhaps, Eva, can we start with you?
Thank you, Emma. I would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her very insightful speech. I will stay in two things she said. The first is that governments often prioritize primary and secondary education after higher education, and okay, this makes sense because the money are often limited, but higher education is as much as important because higher education is a right to lifelong learning and therefore to a more open and springful society. But governments must decide that if we want to spend like 3% of our GDP in army expensive over funding higher education, it's about what society we want for our future, okay? Because universities are the incubators of the future society. The second thing that she said, and I really admired, was about the commercialization of higher education. And it's linked with the first thing because governments don't want to spend their money on higher education, so they want to encourage the private sector to take their role actually to their current private higher education institutions. So yes, I think that this is an instant threat to the academic freedom, which is very important to our whole educational quality, actually, and it must stop.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eva. Kanisha, how about you? What are your initial reactions? Things that stood out to you, things that surprised you, things that you found yourself going, yes, that sounds good to me.
Well, firstly, it was incredibly inspiring to hear from the UN Special Rapporteur herself. And she mentioned that, during COVID-19, a lot of these inequities have been exacerbated. And we know that. We know that during COVID-19, a lot of these inequities worsened for people in vulnerable communities. But what she said that was really inspiring was that the digital world and protection in the digital world is also a right for students. And it is our moral obligation to protect students online as we progress in a digital world. So what do we mean by that? Well, I'd like to ask you all a question. How often do you read the terms of references before you press accept? I see one hand in the audience, maybe two.
Ask the question again.
How many of you read the terms of reference before pressing accept? No one. Maybe one.
Just one.
Maybe one. Now, can you imagine if any young person would take that time? If an adult doesn't take the opportunity to read through a very comprehensive statement of you signing over your human rights to a tech corporation, what makes us think that youth would? It is absolutely disappointing that youth are using these technologies without understanding that they're signing away their rights to freedom, protection, and they're who they are. So I think what the UN Special Rapporteur talked about around the right to higher education, there's a huge intersectionality here at play. It's not only the right to quality education that we must think about, but also the right of how are we interacting in the digital space when acquiring this technology, when acquiring this knowledge, when acquiring these tools and information. And that itself is a conversation that we need to have more often than we don't already.
Thank you very much, Kanisha, and I would be very keen for us to take that up as well. Erendira.
Yeah, I really think it was also very inspired to hear from the Special Rapporteur. And what I take is the idea of lifelong learning. I think it's very important to focus on all levels of education so we can get to a high quality higher education. Because a lot of students that don't have the access to higher education, even though if they get to college, to universities with different opportunities, sometimes they are excluded from college because they don't have the right education before, so they don't know even to talk the language. I mean, in Mexico, we have a lot of indigenous people that speak different languages. So when they go to college, they don't even know how to speak Spanish. So they get to college when they see educational contents in English or either other language. languages, and they have this gap that they have to cover. So we need to focus on all levels, as the Special Rapporteur said, to assure higher quality in higher education. I also stand for the free academic resources. I think it's very important. I was really surprised when I get here to Barcelona and saw that the city has a plan based on science, which is a thing we don't have in Mexico. We have to cover and combine these sectors, the public, the private, and the social, and the academic sector to get to progress. So I was really interested in how she was proposing to have these resources, the researchers doing their work accessible for everyone, so we can get to real progress through science and also technology.
Excellent. Thank you very much, all of you, for those very quick, on the ground reflections. And what I think is interesting, again, I mean, there's many things that are interesting we can take up in a little bit with some questions from those of us who are in the room as well. But there's also, I think, intersections between some of the topics that she's discussed and that, for example, the two of you have just brought up. Kanisha, you talked about protection in a digital world and, who actually reads all that long, very boring text before clicking accept. I think you can tell from that that I don't always. But then, Erendira, you talked about the importance of considering the fact that people come through into higher education knowing multiple languages and having different worldviews. And so I was thinking then about, the intersection of that, because most of what we see in the digital world is predominantly in English. Right? So that small text becomes even more of a complex issue to deal with if you're then having to grapple with a language issue on top of it. So that's just sort of an initial reflection that, that prompted me to think about. So let's think, now about rights sort of perhaps more broadly. And I'd be really interested if each of you could talk a little bit about the rights that you think students in higher education should have. How could we measure these? How could we assure these? And maybe, given that you're coming from three sort of different contexts, you could give some examples of good practices, or perhaps you'd like to give examples of not good practices, because that's also, it's also a learning opportunity from your country or region or from some other part of your background. So rights that students in higher education should have. Who would like to take this one first? Otherwise, it's going to keep going in the same order.
I go first.
Thank you.
I think two important points that every higher education student should have, first of all, is to have equal professional development opportunities as everyone. When we get to college, especially in my college, my university is Tech of Monterrey, so we are really focused on getting good quality jobs, but also acquire this reciprocity compromise, that is, what am I gonna give to society when I graduate? How am I gonna improve society with the things that I've learned in college, and how am I gonna develop myself? So I think universities and schools should be focused on putting these programs that enhance leadership skills, professional skills for everyone, no matter the contents they are coming from. So for example, my university has this program which is called Eugenio Garzazada Leadership Program, which is a program that takes the beliefs and the ideals of Eugenio Garzazada, our founder. And he was a person, he was a businessman who had this idea of society progressing through different programs. So he had his companies in Monterrey, Nuevo León, but he was very aware of his workers, of giving houses, giving medical health care to his workers, and he was actually the pioneer of these programs in Mexico. So I think looking for those experiences to know how to enhance leadership through social work when you obtain the professional knowledge is very important. And the second one, I think, that is international mobility, to get students to get an international experience, because they acquire different perspectives of how we do. We are working here with different countries. I mean, Eva from Greece, and Nisha, that she's also from another country, and we get to know that we have the same problems, but we approach them in different solutions. So I think it's very important to students to have this international mobility, because they get to know the world and know another perspective, so they can learn and take it back to their countries. So yeah, basically, I think we should have the right to those two things. professional development, and international mobility.
Wonderful, very clear. Thank you very much for articulating those. All right, let's go back down the road this way. Kanisha, what about you?
Absolutely. Well, what she said was just so beautifully said. And I think take it from a country that has professional development and also opportunities for students to grow, that's not enough. I think you can always have these supports in place for students to thrive, but they need to survive first. And oftentimes we've noticed around the world that safety for young people is a privilege. Let's think about that for a second. Safety for young people is a privilege? In what world does that make sense? In what world is it okay to say that because of your skin color, your sexual orientation, your gender, your religious background, or any other social status, you have other privileges for your own safety? How is that okay? And so I think the key message about what are human rights in education is we need to focus on this idea of safety. If we look at the stats, 1 in 3 students are bullied each year. And these are students from countries where 720 million of those students are in countries where there is no law protecting them from violence. That is ridiculous. And this is exactly why when we talk about how do we support students, it's not only about student well-being, but it comes down to the most fundamental things about safety, which is why I am so passionate, because in my own university, I have seen over so many girls being sexually assaulted by professors, by peers, and by people that are supposed to respect them the most. In what world is that okay? It is not. And so I ask us all to reflect about what do good practices look like? And I recognize the privilege that I have coming from Canada. And oftentimes we look to North American countries for good models of education. But I sit here in front of you all telling you that perhaps we should not be looking outwards and be looking inwards into your own respective countries where perhaps you do value things like safety. And so when we think about what are good institutional practices, well, it is obvious. We need to invest in safety, and that comes from encouraging governments to make laws to protect young people in environments that are supposed to help them grow the most. And so we need more training for educators around gender-based violence, around sexual-based violence. We need more training and education, not only for learners, but for everyone, because in this world, we are all learners.
Beautifully put. Yeah, please. I very much appreciate you you bringing up that perspective. I might have a response, but I think before I do that, let's go straight to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that into the table, because from my experience in Greece, student safety is a huge issue we have to address. In the university that I study, we have a lot of violent episodes, like in monthly basis, the police invading in the university to stop some people wanting to pursuing violent practices, and it's a very bad experience, having your mother call you because she saw on the TV that some people are going to the university throwing rocks or whatever, and to ask you if you're okay. And I said, yeah, I have to run into the bus station to get home before the police come up, and we have more violent episodes. And now the government has moved on more measures to, have actually established the police inside the universities, which is insane. I mean, in which world universities are supposed to be not safe places for students, places of criminal activities? I mean, it is insane. The other thing that I would like to point out is that the societies are changing more rapidly than our educational systems. So universities have to keep up these rapid changes, the digital transformation, the soft skills for the labor market, the student mobilization. We live in a globalized world, and then we have no programs, that encourage students to travel abroad in other countries or continents. There are surely initiatives like Erasmus+, but the places are very limited. So being a part of a university is being a part of a broader academic community. And I think what I would like to see in the future from universities is students being more close to this academic world. Oftenly, the academic staff is so distant from students. We have to be part of research We have to be part of, the policymaking in the university, and to be engaged in the societal issues as early as is possible.
Excellent. Eva, thank you very much. Kanisha, I know you also did want to talk about today, what higher education institutions can do to protect human rights beyond the right to higher education. So, let me ask you, take this opportunity. So you've talked just now about safety. I don't know whether you'd like to kind of continue talking about safety and perhaps elaborate some suggestions on that, because I think what's critical is that we don't make the issue of student safety the problem of, let's say, women students, female students. We don't make it the problem of black or racialized students. We don't make it the problem of indigenous or ethnic minority students, because it's not their fault. There are systems and structures that have to change. And this is where I would really like to invite you to say, from your perspective, thinking about higher education institutions at that level, what must be changed in order for safety no longer to be a topic that we have to sit here in 2022 and talk about?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that important question. I think oftentimes this issue around inequities, and inequities in terms of safety, starts not only in higher education. We see this in primary schools. By the age of 4, there are students who look at their peers and they start to discriminate. And it's not only these stereotypes in society that we keep, progressing and cultivating that lead to these discrimination, but it's also the systemic practices. We've given too much freedom to teachers to be able to dictate which students succeed and which students do not succeed. And that's not okay. When we think about intelligence, oftentimes we're like, oh, XYZ, this person is so smart in the class, they're brilliant. But we have to think about this. Is intelligence really all about the amount of knowledge you have? Is it really a talent? Or is it more so about the amount of tuition and tuition access that you have, the amount of extracurricular learning supports that you have, the amount of supportive teachers that you have? It's so subjective when we think about who succeeds in society and who doesn't. And Eva perfectly mentioned that, education prepares us for the future of work, for the future of lifelong learning, for the future of living. But if we don't have those supports in place, where we have these inequity gaps, where those who are more privileged have access to tuition, or they have tuition services or extra learning opportunities, whereas others do not, then that's exactly where we see a lot of these gaps being in place. And when we think about safety itself, it's not only, who is protected or how many students are protected, but it also plays role into these systemic inequities that we have that lead to which students are safe and which students are not safe in the community. And this all ties back into student well-being. And you said it so perfectly. It's not about student safety for the black students, for the women, for those of different gender societies, but it's about safety and well-being for all students. And so I'll share one really great example from my university. We've started something called self-reported absences. And this is an opportunity for students who are not feeling well to take a mental health day. And we live in this world where we are able to take, sickness as leaves for our sickness, for if we're not feeling well physically, but now we're trying to take these leaves for students for their well-being. Oh, I'm just so burnt out that I cannot perform or, fulfill my duties as a student. And that's absolutely okay. But in the past, we would have seen a lot of students being bullied for, saying that, oh, I have concerns with my mental health. I am struggling mentally. I am behind on schoolwork. And then we see these continuous, it's circles and circles where teachers continue to say, okay, maybe the student cannot keep up with the supports. Maybe the student cannot keep up with the information. And although these are very different topics around discrimination and safety and well-being, we must recognize that these are all interconnected. And when we can do that, I think is exactly when we can come up with innovative practices and policies for supporting students. And the anonymity of reporting any violence-based practice, any violence episode, any social injustice, or any even mental harm, that itself is very important in this society where all we have is we're able to identify people with their data points. But for students, safety also looks like, how do I ensure that if I say I'm mentally unwell, that I'm also safe in saying that? So there's a lot of different ideas, and I apologize if I was all over the map, but I want us to understand that these are very interconnected itself.
And I'm going to ask you not to apologize, because I think I think it's really important that we put these issues on the table. You know, at IESALC we've been doing, in a partnership work with the Open Society Foundations, a project on the right to higher education, which continues on. And we published yesterday a conceptual paper. We've tried to sort of create this new social justice-driven framework to understand the right to higher education. And I've got some of my team members here who I know will agree in saying that this was not easy to do. When we think about the right to higher education on paper, it sounds so straightforward, you know. Oh yes, the right to higher education. You know, okay, everybody gets to go to higher education. But there's so much more complexity to that. So I really thank you for bringing out some of the many different nuances and levels, because we do have to take these things into consideration. We do have to sort of work forwards on that one. Eva, I'd like to turn to you, because I know also, I've got so many pieces of paper here. I think you wanted to talk a little bit more about, important factors that are relating to the right to higher education for students, taking it from that perspective. So can I invite you to take the floor?
Sure. The factors are very many and varied, and I think we should focus on the fact that available education doesn't mean that it's accessible education. We have many marginalized groups like refugees, people of color, immigrants that are excluded from higher education due to economic reasons mainly. We have also to consider factors like gender, like conflict. I mean, we have people from Ukraine in our project for Fridays for Future Climate Education that overnight lost their access to education. So what are they fighting for right now? Moreover, like in Afghanistan, women are excluded from higher education right now, and we have so many refugees in Europe. What percentage of them are part of our universities? What percent of people of color, people of Africa, from Asia, are taking actual part in higher education? How are they supposed to be integrated in our society if they're not have access to lifelong learning? Moreover, we have to think about the economic inequalities that are the main factor that exclude people from higher education. Even in the most advanced countries like the United States, the fees are so high that many families cannot afford to send their children to universities. I think governments should focus on make available higher education through the institutionalized right to higher education, but also make accessible for everyone, regardless sex, ethnicity, or gender, sexual orientation, religion, or I don't know what.
Okay. Beautifully put, I think, and it also links back to, the Special Rapporteur was talking about the 4 A's framework, or she called it as 4 A's plus 1. I think we talk about it as 5 A's just because it's easier to do the math that way as well. So you mentioned sort of the availability angle on that. So, we also have under that framework accessibility, acceptability, adaptability, and having sort of appropriate provision as well. So I think you've managed to, you mentioned availability, but you touched on all of those because again, there's some quite strong intersections there as well. And you also, it's interesting, gave an example from a country which is incredibly stratified socially and economically. And I think often when we look at the literature on the right to higher education, the US is brought forward as an example simply because of those huge inequities, the very high tuition fees which are charged, and the continuing sort of vertical stratification in the system that means certain people are in these elite institutions and others aren't. And so I think that's quite an interesting case to bring up as well. Thank you. But when we're thinking about the right to higher education, we're also thinking about what happens for students who are able to succeed and get into higher education. What happens when they're there. And Indira, I know this is an area that you're particularly interested in. So could you talk to us a little bit about what steps could be taken so that students can succeed in higher education, and tell us what when we talk about success, like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Eva and Anisha, for your answers and sharing with us your stories. Because I think it's all really connected. I really like what Anisha said about doing development programs in mental health. My university has this program, which is inclusions programs, and I think every university should have it, but not only in paper, because most college and schools have them. Like, you have to include people, you have to take care of mental health, we have to work for gender equality, but if it's only on paper, it doesn't matter. You have to take real actions to put on this. We have this inclusion department in Tech of Monterrey, which is a department that works for mental health. We have workshops on suicide prevention. So those workshops are for teachers, for students, for collaborators of the university, so we can be all aware of the situation. We also have inclusion as I don't know how to say it in English, but it's a sign language, for deaf people. And we have all those kind of programs. But yeah, first, taking action is the thing we have to know. It doesn't matter if we have all the protocols, if we have all the laws, if we don't take action to it. So yeah, basically how to get to success when you acquire higher education. I think the first thing is to have opportunities for itself, scholarships, but not only scholarships for the tuition fee. Something that happens in Mexico is that the most important universities, the high quality universities, are in the cities, and students from the periphery or other students have to take long distances trips to get to school, or even have to move to the city. So students are more worried of how they are going to pay their rent in the apartment they are living, how they are going to eat next after college. So if you are worried about being hungry, about being stressed because of economical needs, you not get the right education. And even if you have the support, you can have a lot of ways of support, and I think this is where all the sectors are connected, the private and the government. Because if you have a government that has a good public transportation, then students can get to universities in an easy way. If you have a government that has houses for the students, my university has this program for housing for the students, is way better for them, so they are not really worried about other factors they shouldn't be, and just taking advantage of their experience. Next one is the opportunities, the connections with the works, connections with companies, connections with research groups, so they can have access to all of this. My city is an industrial city, so basically all the economic comes from industry. We have industry of steel, we have industry of everything in the city. So our works are focused on going, most of our students are engineers, because the normal path is you go to college and then you graduate from engineer and you go to industry to work. But I think we need to expand our vision and start to work in different things and prepare the world for it. Leadership programs, development programs, on all the things that they said, that's what it's needed for higher education.
Excellent, Erendira. Thank you very much. There's so much to take up. I wonder, though, if we could just reflect a little bit on some of the points that the Special Rapporteur made about commercialization and privatization, and those connections with digitalization, lots of isations going on in here. She mentioned, for example, about the increasing reliance, or perhaps we could even see it as outsourcing of, functions of higher education to private companies for textbooks, for conferences, for course creation. I also thought she raised some really interesting issues, which I really haven't heard talked about that much in relation, and Kanisha sort of building on what you said as well, about the data security and privacy online. So I wonder if there's points that you'd like to make from that, or perhaps to reflect on your own experiences of studying during the pandemic, because that was a necessary shift to digitalization, and perhaps make some connections to that between sort of those aspects of privatization and how that might imply or impact on the right to higher education.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important discussion, especially because we had a lot of these courses online, Khan Academy, Microsoft Education, Harvard Education, Coursera. A lot of these different courses were already online before the pandemic, but we've really seen this growth in using these sources after the pandemic. And I think a lot of the conversations I have with our deans at our university is, what has the state of education become? Has it become watered down because it's online? And is the education that you receive at Harvard University, for example, the same as an education you would receive in any other continent around the world or any other university around the world? And that often, the question about prestige in education is something that's been a big concern to, of course, a lot of the prestigious universities in the world. How do we maintain prestige around education if it's so accessible now through online open sources? And so although for a lot of these institutions it's a great threat, I think it's an opportunity to support the dreams of young people. A lot of the times, you'll see when these children in the hospital, they're born with such big eyes for curiosity and dreams in the world. They're hopeful for the change they can make. But a lot of this, becomes destroyed as they continue on in their life because of the inequities in society and because of the lack of access to education, as Eva so beautifully mentioned. In our society, which is why when we talk about higher education, a lot of the degrees is what you need now to become successful at jobs. If you have an MBA behind your name, then you have a higher salary in the corporate world. And it is a big question for us to think about. Is this something that we want for the future of our world? It might be so for the privileged people, and as someone who does come from privilege, I recognize that that is not absolutely fair for the rest of the world, because there are so many dreams and so many hopes that we lose every single minute a student does not have access to higher education. And so I'm very hopeful for the future of having open access to higher education through sources like Khan Academy, through sources like Coursera and Microsoft Education, which is why sometimes the governments can feel threatened by the privatization of education, but it's not privatization that's the word. It's about freedom to having access to education that we should be thinking about. And if it's the private sector that's innovating faster than governments can, then why are we complaining? Why are we complaining when we are supporting the most vulnerable people to have their dreams come into reality? So that's what I'd like for all of us to reflect on.
It's a very interesting point. Thank you very much. Erendir or Eva, would you like to come in?
Yeah, what you just said, Anisha, is amazing. And the last point about privatization, like while we are complaining if a private sector can make us advance, in my university we have this model, which is a model when you take theoretical classes, but at the same time you can work with a company related to what you are learning. So these are called socioformadores, which is a company that comes and gives you a problem, and it's really, really interesting the way you learn, because you apply the things you're learning, and education is not only about solving an equation, it's not about just seeing formulas, but applying it to society. How, to our knowledge, we are going to make a change. And if private sectors offers this opportunity to you through your university, you should take it, because it's not experience. I mean, we are not preparing ourselves just to go and be the director and the CEOs of any company, but we are preparing ourselves to take these abilities to adapt ourselves to real world problems. So yeah, I really like that. And the digitalization part, I think pandemic make us advance a lot in schools through technology, but it also makes us realize that we need to work more in accessibility for all groups. Because I mean, my experience has been in private education in Mexico, but if you go to public education in Mexico, we have a lot of gaps that need to be covered and a lot of challenges. Public universities didn't have the proper access to support a network, an online network of thousands and thousands of students. So yeah, we need to start working in tools such as Khan Academy and Coursera, but letting people know what tools are these for. In my project, in my social initiative, we introduced Khan Academy to students that didn't know what was a platform. They didn't know how they have all these internet things because they don't have even access to internet. So I think one important thing in the digitalization first is giving the electronic tools to people, to put community centers where people can go and use a computer, teach them how to use a computer and get to this access. Because we cannot talk about virtual learning if not everyone has the tools to go to an online computer.
Yeah, I think it's very important to remind us that we have to, also consider those basic building blocks as well. Thank you. Eva.
Thank you. I would like to point out two things. The first thing is that we have to be very careful when it comes to the private sector, because whatever they do it for profit. This is the objective reason of a company, and it's very understandable. It came to my mind an incident we had in Greece 2 years ago, or 1 year, when the Minister of Education bought the services of a company for online learning to schools. And after months, we found out that the data of students that collected are not protected, and they use from this company, I won't say the name, for commercial reasons, which is a huge scandal, but no one talked about it, of course. The other thing that I would like to point out is inclusiveness. I was talking with an Afghan girl yesterday, and I was asking her how we can integrate Afghan refugees in our universities, even in Greece and in Europe. And she said to me that although they have access to many courses online, most refugee camps had no Wi-Fi access at all. And many tools exist, like MIT Open Courses or Khan Academy, Coursera, edX, but you need a bachelor degree, you need the paper, unfortunately, to find a job at the end of the day. So we have to think how we can use all these tools complementary to in-person learning, and of course to integrate them in our higher education universities and to use them to include more people in our systems.
Brilliant, thank you, Eva. And also, I think it's, that is several important points, of course, being made. But thinking there about, the nature of private companies, and in fact, we had a different roundtable yesterday on new approaches to the right to higher education. I can see we have some of the panelists here, so they may want to sort of come back into the conversation as well, because it came up there as well. So if we're going to sort of accept the fact that the private sector has activity in higher education, how do we deal with the fact that it may be for profit, so the motive for providing higher education might be different, or it is different, let's be clear about it. So how do we manage that? How do we take that forward? And just to sort of build on your point about, how do we support student inclusion for students who are currently not able to access higher education? We know that only 5% of eligible refugees are in higher education. So you have to start again, as you were saying, with the basics. If you don't have a Wi-Fi somewhere and you want to learn online, that's the basic, that's a sort of basic infrastructural issue that has to be addressed as well. So those have been some fantastic points. I'm going to ask now whether any of the people who are joining us in the room today or online would like to put forward any questions for our panelists. Let's see if we can take a few and group them together. Do we have another mic? Or just this one? Okay, do you mind?
Thank you.
Okay, so questions? Okay. So one over here, and then one at the back in the first round. So we'll take a few questions together, and then panelists, you choose if you want to answer one or all of them and make a brief intervention in response. And if you could just introduce yourself, please, and then let us know where you're joining from. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
My name is Daniela. I'm with IESALC, the Institute of Higher Education for Latin America and the Caribbean. I want to make a comment and a question, and I'm going to try to be quick. I just want to, when we talk about the 4As or 5As that were mentioned by the Special Rapporteur, but also by other work of IESALC, we have the last one that is accountability. And I think that's very important, and you have mentioned things on that. And I want to even go further and say accountability to whom? Because, well, in this room is not full. And there is very few events in this conference that have youth and have students. which is supposed to be the people that benefit from higher education. So I just wanted to congratulate you for being here and for raising your voices and giving the youth perspective. And we need to continue doing this because universities and the higher education sector overall, it's trying to be accountable, but accountable maybe not to students, but to other reasons and other actors. And I also wanted to mention that for me it's a bit worrisome that you mentioned about that, why are we complaining if the private sector is bringing more access, right, or more opportunities? And of course it has to have some place in providing access. If they can help, of course we're going to let them help. But I think we still need to complain because we have to complain to that the public sector that is not answering to our needs and that we are turning to the other side. But it's not about, oh, they are doing it better, so let's just stay with them. It's really raising your voices and say, like, no, that's your responsibility to provide us. And yeah, so I just wanted to congratulate you on that and to ask the question, like, what do you think of this topic of, it's not only, well, getting access, but the quality of that education and who is accessing it and for what reasons, and as you have all mentioned, the security reasons and with the digital world, you know? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the question from the gentleman at the front and then one at the back. Sorry if I got the order the wrong way around. And then we'll invite the panelists to respond.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. My name is Mohammed Amin Al-Hadas. I'm the director of the Mauritanian Authority for the Assurance Quality to Higher Education. I, first of all, thank you for the topic, which is quite very interesting. In my perspective as a former president of the Mauritanian Committee of Prevention Against Torture and accustomed to attend sessions in the United Nations Council for Human Rights, this topic is not usual, although we have a special rapporteur for the rights to education. This topic is not usually tackled and it's not very common. It's mainly overwhelmed by the rapporteur special for discrimination against women, slavery. You see, although this topic includes all of this, you mentioned, and all of you mentioned the topic of safety and the rights to students, mobility, and so those topics should be included. So I also thank you for this panel, 100% of girls or women, okay?
We'll take women, but thank you. Yeah. Or however you prefer.
Okay, it's a good thing anyway. Although I was going to say that Africa is not represented, but since the special rapporteur is from Burkina Faso, we are represented because I'm talking on my behalf of from West Africa. So I go back now to the topic, which is the problem in higher education is we have many things we have to tackle in order to have a good quality of higher education. One of them is the mobility of students and their rights to study abroad. Because if you stay in your country, the opportunities are not like the opportunities you get abroad and the quality you get abroad when you have access to that's one of the things very important, mobility. Researchers also, we don't have to forget about researchers. They don't have this also right. And to have access, you have the means. And this is something already we have to tackle because we don't have only good hopes, but we have to have the means to achieve those goals and those rights. Also, there is another problem which is interesting, the programs. And I think that United Nations and UNESCO should work in harmonizing the programs. We shouldn't, we have the LMD, but if you don't have the the same programs and the same opportunities, and you don't succeed in the mobility. So I think one of the things UNESCO should tackle is to work in the harmonization of programs around the world. It's not easy, but it should be one of the goals because it's the right to higher education.
Thank you.
I don't want to be too long. I have already been too long. Okay. I apologize, and I give the opportunity to someone else.
Wonderful,
Thanks.
thank you. So we have a question at the back as well. Thank you for those comments.
Thank you. I'm sorry I arrived late, but I did manage to listen to the last part. You asked a question, why are we complaining? And I would like to answer to that. I'm one of those people who is complaining and has been complaining for the past 25 years.
Apologies for interrupting. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes,
so we know why you're complaining.
Yes, just afterwards. I was about to, Emma. And we need to talk later, you and I. Okay, so I'm Juliette Torabian, and I'm the Deputy Team Leader of the European-funded project, which is called Pioneered. And we are focusing on pioneering policies and practices that tackle educational inequalities. And I have 25 years of experience in international development and education. The complaint comes from this perspective. Purpose or profit? That's a question that we need to be asking. That's one thing. The second is, we do have principles of Abidjan, and I do invite you please to take a look at that. Principles of Abidjan say that it is the state's responsibility to provide education free for everyone. If there are gaps, yes, it is good that private sector can replace it and can, fill those gaps. In Peru, for example, there was a very good example where I saw a community of private people have gathered in order to provide access to students who would have to get on their boats, go across the lake for about 2 hours, little girls and boys who would row to go to school, and that was a hope that they were giving to them, an opportunity, yes. But when we're talking about online courses, as I said in my head talk at the beginning of this conference, focusing on educational inequalities, we woke up to a digital divide in the world during the pandemic. 3.7 billion people did not have access to internet, including 800 million young people such as yourselves. That's one thing. Coursera, I have taken courses on it myself for the sake of research, of understanding what the process is, but also for my own interest to develop my own capacities. It's not something that you're going to give to your employer so that they would employ you. It's an added value. It adds to your already existing knowledge, perhaps, but they are not going to hire you based on a certificate that you get from Coursera. The second thing is the assessment that happens on Coursera, for example, people are not trained for that kind of assessment. These are students from all around the world, and I have been there. You beg the other one to assess you in exchange for an assessment of their work. So it is like a combination of people asking, if you do assess my final project, I'll do yours. And you're done with it, you get the certificate. So it's the whole question about right to education, which is the responsibility of the states, purpose or profit, all the frameworks that exist, and then yes, how do we control private sector? For example, in Africa, we have a problem of growing private sector that is not even abiding to the rules of the Ministry of Education, you see? So these are all the problems that we have around the world. I understand your enthusiasm. I understand that it can fill the gaps, but I still am going to stay very straight in my shoes to say I'm still with the responsibility of the state to provide free education to all of you with quality. And then if there are gaps, we can sit around the table, talk with the private sector and see how we can manage those gaps. I'm sorry if I was long, but this is something that I'm very much passionate about: quality, access, and then access to what?
Thank you. We're going to need the mic back up front for Indira. Let's take some responses to that. I will just briefly say you mentioned the Abidjan principles on the right to education, and I'd just like Delphine Dorsey to wave. Thank you, Delphine. Delphine was instrumental in the process behind getting the Abidjan principles into realization. So she's here with the Right to Education initiative. So if you don't know about the Abidjan principles, Delphine is the person to ask. And she has 3 copies in her bag.
I claim one.
All right. Let's follow that up. Let's turn back to our panelists, please, whilst we have them with us on the stage. So we've had a couple of sort of related comments, and then some, picking up some of the different issues as well, including student mobility. So,
can I start?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I will try to answer both first and the third question. When I started working on a research project a few months ago about mapping our university's contributions to SDGs, we have to read all the papers that our university has published the last 10 years and assess them according to their contribution of SDGs. And I was very surprised that I saw that our university, Athens University of Economics and Business, was working a lot for some oil companies. And I found out that these oil companies had made huge donations to universities. So regarding the accountability, when you're based on private fundings and not on public fundings, you are accountable to the public sector. And this is a huge problem, because when I was trying to make our university building net zero, I couldn't, because we received fundings from Greek oil fields. So we cannot put solar panels, for example. And I find this really absurd and unethical for a university to be, funded. And it also undermines the quality of our research. I mean, really, this is what are you paid for? To work for oil companies to find how they can maximize their profits in 2022? I don't know what I say. I mean, in a neoliberalistic world, maybe that makes sense, but it is deeply unethical. And we have to change the way we think about the public and the private sector. And we have to work together about a sustainable future, not how to maximize our profit for the next 10 years, while the planet may not exist in 200 years from now. Regarding to the mobility, students' mobility, I think that student mobility can tackle racism in many ways. As I have seen from the Erasmus program, so in Europe, okay, it's a very good initiative, but why we do not travel in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America? I mean, if you do not have, if you don't see other cultures, other religions, people with totally different cultures and mindset, how are you supposed to understand them and tackle racism? Because Europe, more or less, we have all the same mindset. But why are we so, do we forget about the mobility to other continents and other cultures? That's for me.
Yes, very much. And I'd just like you to, thank you. And I hope that applause also covers the previous point you make about how and to whom higher education institutions are accountable as well. Thank you. Okay, Erindira and Kanisha.
Yeah, I'm having this internal debate, with the public and the private discussion. Because
tell us about that.
yeah. I mean, my education right now, it's being funded by private.
You're in a very prestigious private university, Tec de Monterrey.
Yeah, and I have a scholarship which is paid by private sector. If it wasn't for private sector, I wouldn't be able to study college. So yeah, today I'm hearing a lot of opinions about how evil the private sector is, but I've been very grateful because, you know, they create these opportunities. The thing we have in Mexico is that we have a lot of corruption, a lot of corruption in our government. So money that was supposed to go to education ends up in bad places. So we have this part, you know, in Mexico, private sectors do a lot of social work, because if they do social funding for projects, social funding for scholarships, or anything related to the social sector, they avoid taxes. So they get a benefit, yes, they get a benefit of not paying taxes, and that increases their profit, but they also are doing good to society that government is not doing. This belief that this is a very big issue in our country, we really look for government to stop doing these practices, but it's a really hard issue. So that's where I get this combination of private, social, and public. I mean, we see bad points in each of them, but we have to highlight also the good points. So that's where my internal debate was in the whole conversation, you know, because I was like, yeah, but if it wasn't for private sector, I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be studying, I wouldn't be like giving this project to my community. So yeah, I think we need to start also seeing the good things of this part. And as I said before, my city is an industrial city. Most of the works of people in my city are related to industry. So I've seen how companies have raised the quality of life in my city, in the communities. So yeah, I mean, the issue of private companies also in Mexico is being addressed in terms of sustainability of the practices they have. My city is also one of the most contaminated cities in Latin America. We have a lot of carbon dioxide emissions, and you know, it's the social sector, not the public one, who's taking part of these solutions, part of demanding public to take action, because I think, and I hope the leaders that I see here from Mexico and other Latin American countries take the work and the ideas that you guys have in Europe, because I mean, I admire how really advanced you are, but we have to take this to Latin America, because we cannot see only the evil in private companies. I mean, here you have a pretty established government, but there we have not. So we have to start work in both parts, public and also private, because they give opportunities and they are life changers also for students like me and many other students that have been benefit. And those students, believe me, they are working for the communities and they are raising their voices so we can solve these problems all together.
Thank you so much, Erindira. Just before I pass to Kanisha, I can't stop myself from saying, you know, I've heard a couple of times this idea that there are advanced countries and that there therefore by default are those that are not. I'd like us to be able to move beyond that a little bit without overlooking some of the structural inequalities and historic injustices which still exist and which permeate and make us say these things. But I think we have to recognize that, for example, in Mexico, you have such rich culture. You have such amazing, different, multiple languages, cosmovisions, worldviews. So I think there's many things from Mexico that the rest of the world should and must learn from. So I would encourage you also, you know, and all of us as well, just as we're talking, and I'm sorry, I've just taken it a little bit off topic, but I'm sorry, I couldn't let that one last, and I'm going to hand over to Kanisha, because you're the panelist, and I'm supposed to be just asking the questions. Kanisha, over to you.
Thank you. That was a great point, and I want to thank the entire audience for raising your perspectives and sharing your experiences around working in the public sector. As someone who has seen it from a bit of both sides, I'm like Erindira. You know, I've seen the benefit of the private sector in education, but that does not mean I'm not mindful of the harmful effects that sometimes, as Ava mentioned, the big data breaches that happen in education. So I think when we think about private and public sector, this world is not perfect. There's corruption everywhere. There's a focus of profit everywhere. And Ava, the economist, I'm sure knows that the best. But we need to reshift this thinking about, oh, what is so bad about this side? What is so bad about this side? I would love to live in a world where we can all just collaborate. Why can't we find the most beneficial aspects and strength points of each the public sector and the private sector and work together, but also work together to hold each other accountable? If it is the governments that make these laws, then why don't they hold the private sector accountable? And why doesn't the private sector hold the government accountable for accessible, inclusive, and equitable education itself? Why is it that always the private sector is able to innovate and governments are always left behind thinking about, oh, this is also a great idea. This is possible. Might be possible for all students to also have access to Wi-Fi. This is often a question I have, and sometimes working in higher education, I see that a lot of the elementary schools, they have better access to education than we do in higher education. And I reflected on this with a lot of my professors, and the big thing that came up in our discussion was that professors, their main motive is not to teach, it's to research. And for universities, their main motive is not for students to learn, it's to increase research and funding for their own research. So I think when we think about, who really benefits from profit, it's not only the private sector. There's universities who are only in it to get the best researchers in the world so they have the best funding for their own university institutions. And Ava mentioned a great idea about divestment. And in our university, where it's an option that we're exploring, but our student council was the one that actually put forth this motion to divest from not only companies that use fossil fuels, but even explore it. And so when we talk about student mobilization in this whole demographic, maybe students are the answer to understanding who needs to be held accountable for what. Is it the public sector? Is it the private sector? And as we reflect on this debate, I would ask you all to sincerely not neglect the private sector completely, because as Arindira, there are so many other young people that benefit greatly from learning from these private sectors. And they are the ones, might be because of their profit, who are able to innovate very quickly. And it is the governments that need to start learning about online education, because private sectors knew it best from the start. And yes, there are a lot of issues as well, and we need to think about ethics as we continue to move forward. But I request us all to not neglect the positives, because it does transform lives. And so we need to work together as a society and not against each other. And that's all I would say.
Okay, we are just a little bit out of time. I'm sorry, Ariana, you're going to have to wait. You're going to, please forgive me, right? Just to wrap up, I mean, for now, I hope that we can, use this as a start of, something that we can continue on with. So we brought you here today to help us understand a little bit more about youth perspectives on higher education as a human right. So just as we close off, and this is always a difficult task to do, you know what I'm going to ask, don't you? Is there one key thing that you'd like the people who are watching today and the wider audience that we hope UNESCO will be able to reach through this higher education conference? What would be one key thing that you'd like people to take away from your perspective? Arindira.
Listen to youth. Thank you for this space, space for youth women especially, but listen to the next generations, and not just because they are taking the decisions of tomorrow, because they are taking the decisions of today. So thank you very much for this space, and create opportunities. Just create opportunities for everyone. I hope that everything that we saw here today, that this conference is not something that stays here in Barcelona, but you can take it to your countries and start working on these issues we have seen these whole 3 days. Thank you very much.
Tanisha.
Thank you. I think taking it a step further, it's not enough for young people to only have a seat at the table. We need to be included in making these policies and practices and actually taking the leadership action. And so not only listening to young people, but including us in strengthening the goals that we have as a society. And I think for me, it's a bit funny that even in the 21st century, we're talking about what does it mean as education to be a human right. And so we all need to reflect back and think, are these conversations we still need to be having? And why can we not start mobilizing communities already? You know, who do we need to hold accountable for the amount of inaction that we've had in society for so many years that still lead to these injustices that we have today and the inequities and disparities that we have in education, something that's supposed to be so precious to unleashing talent and potential for young people. But I thank you all for your generosity and time in listening to us today, because that is so important. And I want to give a shout out to Emma for having us young people here today, because as we've seen, there's not a lot of spaces for us. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time, and I really hope that you can take these conversations and ideas, as Indira mentioned, in your own countries, but include the young people. If you have children in your house, start conversations with them. Maybe ask them about what human rights they feel as though have been violated for them. Start in your own household, and then move beyond to your schools, education institutions, and involve more young people in building and changing the policies and systems. But thank you all again for today.
Eva, the last word is with you.
That's a tricky one, because there's never one thing to take away.
I know, but I'm going to push you for it.
Thank you very much for having us here. I hope next year we'll see more young people being here in the conference, but also being in the policy-making rooms, being in UNESCO offices, have a seat on the table, and have their opinion being heard. One takeaway thing that I would like to point out is that I know people here, you're working on the higher education field, and every time you have to make a decision, ask yourself to see the bigger picture, because the bigger picture is that higher education is a human right, and that's indebatable. We cannot forget that, and we cannot leave nothing to interpret that. That's for me, and I know we debated a lot for some things, and we could debate forever about the public and the private sector. And yeah, in the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, is that ethical? Is that more beneficial than not? So yeah, see the bigger picture. That's fine.
Okay, so listen, include, see the bigger picture, but right now, say thank you very much to these brilliant panelists. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining today, colleagues.